All right, we are coming up on, and a little past, 8 o'clock. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, and see what tonight has in store for us. Welcome back. Whoop, I did not switch over our book. Let's get that fixed. There we are. So, we are starting back up tonight with the extraordinary adventures of Arsène Lupin, the original Gentleman-Burglar. It's been kind of fun already. From the beginning, we're introduced to the character sort of midway through the story, as his reputation precedes him as a character. And that can be a lot of fun. It's a nice narrative framing. We know that this character is a famous thief. We don't necessarily know his previous exploits, but we know he has a reputation. We know he has a following. And we know he's pursued. And even in the first story, he was already captured. Brought to the law, such as it was. And in the second story, we see him in prison. But as we move into the third, we find more and more that it was mostly by design. Yeah, he may not have been... Yeah, it seems like it was a popular thing to do in detective fiction at the time. And it works even today. You see some people carrying it on, or using that trope as it is to establish that their characters are a big deal without having to go through all the motions of a backstory or an origin story. It leaves the door open for later to visit those origin stories, or just to leave it always intentionally vague. You don't need to retcon anything if you never define anything. But yes, you are right. It was a lot bigger in the detective stories. You see it with Sherlock Holmes, you see it with Poirot, you see it all over the place. And it can be on both sides, both the good guys and the bad guys. And that's why it works. Because the audience just latches onto it. It's something that modern-day Hollywood has forgotten. You don't need to reintroduce a character every time you reboot the franchise. I'm looking at you, Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, all of the heroes. We know who they are, and even if we didn't, it's well established. That's true. People don't really recognize the difference. But, I mean... It shouldn't... Spider-Man is absolutely the worst. A few of them have been good, but every single time they need to retread the same story in the same way. This most recent one was a little less bad, because it did change things up a little bit, and didn't have the whole great power, great responsibility talk coming in. But every time they change actors, they have to redo and rehash it. It's exactly. You know. Much as I like Spider-Man as a character, as a concept, please, we know, just jump in midway. It's fine. It's fine. Where were we? So, you may be familiar with the adaptations of Arsène Lupin. Well, not necessarily the adaptations of himself, but of his grandson. And that is also a very fun twist that you don't see very much of. It's another media latching on to an existing character and making full use of all that prior reputation and building on it in their own way with their own characters. Yeah. I enjoy Lupin III quite a lot, and I like the concept that they've done. And, like I said, you don't see it very often. Every once in a while, you'll see someone latch on to say they'll reuse or reset Sherlock Holmes in another setting or timeline or shift things up, but it's usually just a reframing of the same thing. So, the creativity that's involved in taking an existing property and not twisting it or taking it over, but just hooking into it. Sort of, yeah, there's a little bit of coattail riding, but really, it's mostly just catching on and having a little wink with the audience for those in the know. And those that don't know, it doesn't really matter that much. But yes, that's a fun little added tidbit that we have. Yeah. That's, you know what, I can't be too disappointed, because it was done pretty well. Like, the Persona is a good property. They do well with their stuff. But you're missing out. You're missing out on the joys of the original Lupin, or even Lupin III. And they are so much fun. Alright. Let's go ahead and get back to our book. Because we do have quite a lot ahead of us. And we left off last time right about in the middle of a chapter. The timing worked such that it just had to happen, for one. And for two, we came to a decent breaking point to leave a satisfactorily tantalizing cliffhanger at the end of last time's reading. So, let's go ahead and jump back in to Maurice Leblanc's The Extraordinary Adventures of Arsène Lupin. And this is the third case, or third chapter, wherein he has openly declared that he has no intention to stand a trial. He's been in jail, and he has been rotting away, but he's not going to make this a habit. So let's dive back in. It was under these conditions that the trial commenced. An enormous crowd gathered at the court. Everybody wished to see the famous Arsène Lupin. They had a gleeful anticipation that the prisoner would play some audacious pranks upon the judge. Advocates and magistrates, reporters and men of the world, actresses and society women were crowded together on the benches provided for the public. It was a dark, somber day, with a steady downpour of rain. Only a dim light pervaded the courtroom, and the spectators caught a very indistinct view of the prisoner when the guards brought him in. But his heavy, shambling walk, the manner in which he dropped into his seat, and his passive, stupid appearance were not at all prepossessing. Several times, his advocate, one of Monsieur Danval's assistants, spoke to him, but he simply shook his head and said nothing. The clerk read the indictment. Then the judge spoke. "Prisoner at the bar, stand up! Your name, age, and occupation." Not receiving any reply, the judge repeated, "Your name? I ask your name!" A thick, slow voice muttered, "Baudru Désiré." A murmur of surprise pervaded the courtroom, but the judge proceeded, "Baudru Désiré? A new alias. Well, as you have already assumed a dozen different names, and this one is no doubt as imaginary as the others, we will adhere to the name of Arsène Lupin, by which you are more generally known." The judge referred to his notes and continued, "For, despite the most diligent search, your past history remains unknown. Your case is unique in the annals of crime. We know not whom you are, whence you came, your birth and breeding, all is a mystery to us. 3 years ago you appeared in our midst as Arsène Lupin. presenting to us a strange combination of intelligence and perversion, immorality and generosity. Our knowledge of your life prior to that date is vague and problematical. It may be that the man called Rostad, who 8 years ago worked with Dixon, the prestidigitator, was none other than Arsène Lupin. It is probable that the Russian student who 6 years ago attended the laboratory of Dr. Altier at the St. Louis Hospital, and who often astonished the doctor by the ingenuity of his hypotheses on subjects of bacteriology and the boldness of his experiments in diseases of the skin, was none other than Arsène Lupin. It is probable, also, that Arsène Lupin was the professor who introduced the Japanese art of jiu-jitsu to the Parisian public. Oh. We have some reason to believe that Arsène Lupin was the bicyclist who won the Grand Prix d'Exposition. He received his 10,000 francs and was never heard of again. Arsène Lupin may have been also the person who saved so many lives through the little dormer window at the charity bazaar, and, at the same time, picked their pockets. The judge paused for a moment, then continued. Such is that epoch, which seems to have been utilized by you in a thorough preparation for the warfare you have once waged against society. A methodical apprenticeship in which you developed your strength, energy, and skill to the highest point possible. Do you acknowledge the accuracy of these facts? During this discourse, the prisoner had stood balancing himself, first on one foot, then on the other, with shoulders stooped and arms inert. Under the strongest light, one could observe his extreme thinness, his hollow cheeks, his projecting cheekbones, his earthen-colored face dotted with small red spots, and framed in a rough, straggling beard. Prison life had caused him to age and wither. He had lost the youthful face and elegant figure we had seen portrayed so often in the newspapers. It appeared as if he had not heard the question propounded by the judge. Twice it was repeated to him. Then he raised his eyes, seemed to reflect. Then, making a desperate effort, he murmured, "Baudru, Desiree." The judge smiled as he said, "I do not understand the theory of your defense, Arsène Lupin. If you are seeking to avoid responsibility for your crimes on the ground of imbecility, such a line of defense is open to you. But I shall proceed with the trial and pay no heed to your vagaries." He then narrated, at length, the various thefts, swindles, and forgeries charged against Lupin. Sometimes he questioned the prisoner, but the latter simply grunted or remained silent. The examination of witnesses commenced. Some of the evidence given was immaterial. Other portions of it seemed more important. But through all of it, there ran a vein of contradictions and inconsistencies. A wearisome obscurity enveloped the proceedings, until Detective Ganimard was called as a witness. Then interest was revived. From the beginning, the actions of the veteran detective appeared strange and unaccountable. He was nervous and ill at ease. Several times he looked at the prisoner with obvious doubt and anxiety. Then, with his hands resting on the rail in front of him, he recounted the events in which he had participated, including his pursuit of the prisoner across Europe and his arrival in America. He was listened to with great avidity, as his capture of Arsène Lupin was well known to everyone through the medium of the press. Toward the close of his testimony, after referring to his conversations with Arsène Lupin, he stopped, twice, embarrassed and undecided. It was apparent that he was possessed of some thought which he feared to utter. The judge said to him sympathetically, "If you are ill, you may retire for the present." No, but..." He stopped, looked sharply at the prisoner, and said, "I ask permission to scrutinize the prisoner at closer range. There is some mystery about him that I must solve." He approached the accused man, examined him attentively for several minutes, then returned to the witness stand, and, in an almost solemn voice, he said, "I declare, on oath, that the prisoner now before me is not Arsène Lupin." A profound silence followed the statement. The judge, nonplussed for a moment, exclaimed, "Ah! What do you mean? That is absurd!" The detective continued, "At first sight there is a certain resemblance, but if you carefully consider the nose, the mouth, the hair, the color of skin, you will see that it is not Arsène Lupin. And the eyes! Did he ever have those alcoholic eyes?" Come, witness, what do you mean? Do you pretend to say that we are trying the wrong man? In my opinion, yes. Arsène Lupin has, in some manner, contrived to put this poor devil in his place, unless this man is a willing accomplice. This dramatic denouement caused such laughter and excitement among the spectators. The judge adjourned the trial, and sent for Monsieur Bouvier, the jailer, and guards employed in the prison. When the trial was resumed, Monsieur Bouvier and the jailer examined the accused and declared that there was only a very slight resemblance between the prisoner and Arsène Lupin. "Well then," exclaimed the judge, "who is this man? Where does he come from? What is he in prison for?" 2 of the prison guards were called, and both of them declared that the prisoner was Arsène Lupin. The judge breathed once more. But one of the guards then said, Yes, I think it is he." "What?" cried the judge impatiently. "You think it is he? What do you mean by that?" "Well, I saw very little of the prisoner. He was placed in my charge in the evening, and for 2 months he seldom stirred, but laid on his bed with his face to the wall." "What about the time prior to those 2 months?" "Before that, he occupied a cell in another part of the prison. He was not in cell 24. Here the head jailer interrupted, and said, We changed him to another cell after his attempted escape." "But you, monsieur, you have seen him during those 2 months?" I had no occasion to see him. He was always quiet and orderly." "And this prisoner is not Arsène Lupin?" "No." "Then who is he?" demanded the judge. "I do not know." "Then we have before us a man who was substituted for Arsène Lupin 2 months ago. How do you explain that?" "I cannot." In absolute despair, the judge turned to the accused and addressed him in a conciliatory tone. "Prisoner, can you tell me how, and since when, you became an inmate of the prison de la Santé?" The engaging manner of the judge was calculated to disarm the mistrust and awaken the understanding of the accused man. He tried to reply. Finally, under clever and gentle questioning, he succeeded in framing a few phrases, from which the following story was gleaned. 2 months ago, he had been taken to the depot, examined, and released. As he was leaving the building, a free man, he was seized by 2 guards and placed in the prison van. Since then, he had occupied cell 24. He was contented there, plenty to eat, and he slept well, so he did not complain. All that seemed probable, and amidst the mirth and excitement of the spectators, the judge adjourned the trial until the story could be investigated and verified. Well, so we've seen the substitution, but the how and where is Lupin now? Or is it actually a substitution? Is it actually Lupin now that is running a double hoodwink? Oh, we'll find out. The following facts were at once established by an examination of the prison records. 8 weeks before, a man named Baudru Desiré had slept in the depot. He was released the next day and left the depot at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. On the same day, at 2 o'clock, having been examined for the last time, Arsène Lupin left the depot in a prison van. Had the guards made a mistake? Had they been deceived by the resemblance and carelessly substituted this man for their prisoner? Another question suggested itself. Had the substitution been arranged in advance? In that event, Baudru must have been an accomplice and must have caused his own arrest for the express purpose of taking Lupin's place. But then, by what miracle had such a plan, based on a series of improbable chances, been carried to success? Baudru Désiré was turned over to the anthropological service. They had never seen anything like him. However, they easily traced his past history. He was known at Courbevoie, at Annecy, and at Levallois. He lived on alms and slept in one of those ragpickers' huts near the Barrier des Ternes. He had disappeared from there a year ago. Had he been enticed away by Arsène Lupin? Was there no evidence to that effect? There was no evidence to that effect. And even if that was so, it did not explain the flight of the prisoner. That still remained a mystery. Amongst 20 theories which sought to explain it, not one was satisfactory. Of the escape itself, there was no doubt, an escape that was incomprehensible, sensational, in which the public, as well as the officers of the law, could detect a carefully prepared plan, a combination of circumstances marvelously dovetailed, whereof the denouement fully justified the confident prediction of Arsène Lupin. I shall not be present at my trial. After a month of patient investigation, the problem remained unsolved. The poor devil of a Baudru could not be kept in prison indefinitely, and to place him on trial would be ridiculous. There was no charge against him. Consequently, he was released. But the chief of the Sûreté resolved to keep him under surveillance. The idea originated with Ganimard. From his point of view, there was neither complicity nor chance. Baudru was an instrument upon which Arsène Lupin had played with his extraordinary skill. Baudru, when set at liberty, would lead them to Arsène Lupin, or, at least, to some of his accomplices. The two inspectors, Folenfant and Duty, were assigned to assist Ganimard. One foggy morning in January, the prison gates opened, and Baudru Désiré stepped forth, a free man. At first he appeared to be quite embarrassed, and walked like a person who has no precise idea whither he is going. He followed the Rue de la Sainte and the Rue Saint-Jacques. He stopped in front of an old clothes shop, removed his jacket and his vest, sold his vest, on which he realized a few sous. Then, replacing his jacket, he proceeded on his way. He crossed the Seine. At the Châtelet, an omnibus passed him. He wished to enter it, but there was no place. The controller advised him to secure a number, so he entered the waiting room. Ganimard called to his two assistants, and, without removing his eyes from the waiting room, he said to them, "Stop a carriage. No, two. That will be better. I will go with one of you, and we will follow him." The men obeyed, yet Baudru did not appear. Ganimard entered the waiting room. It was empty. "Idiot that I am!" he muttered. "I forgot there was another exit." There was an interior corridor extending from the waiting room to the Rue Saint-Martin. Ganimard rushed through it and arrived just in time to observe Baudru upon the top of the Batignolles Jardin des Plates omnibus, as it was turning the corner of the Rue de Rivoli. He ran and caught the omnibus, but he had lost his two assistants. He must continue the pursuit alone. In his anger, he was inclined to seize the man by the collar without ceremony. Was it not with meditation, that by means of an ingenious ruse that his pretended imbecile had separated him from his assistants? He looked at Baudru. The latter was asleep on the bench, his head rolling from side to side, his mouth half opened, and an incredible expression of stupidity on his blotched face. No, Such an adversary was incapable of deceiving old Ganimard. It was a stroke of luck, nothing more. At the Galeries Lafayette, the man leaped from the omnibus and took the Lamute tramway, following the Boulevard Haussmann and the Avenue Victor Hugo. Baudru alighted at the Lamute station and, with a nonchalant air, strolled into the Bois de Boulogne. He wandered through one path after another, and sometimes retraced his steps. What was he seeking? Had he any definite object? At the end of an hour, he appeared to be faint from fatigue, and, noticing a bench, he sat down. The spot, not far from Etui, on the edge of a pond hidden amongst the trees, was absolutely deserted. After the lapse of another half-hour, Ganimard became impatient, and resolved to speak to the man. He approached and took a seat beside Baudru, lighted a cigarette, traced some figures in the sand with the end of his cane, and said, "It's a pleasant day." No response. But suddenly, the man burst into laughter. Happy, mirthful laugh, spontaneous and irresistible. Ganimard felt his hair stand on end in horror and surprise. It was that laugh. That infernal laugh he knew so well. With a sudden movement, he seized the man by the collar and looked at him with a keen, penetrating gaze, and found that he no longer saw the man Baudru. To be sure, he saw Baudru, but at the same time he saw the other, the real man, Lupin. He discovered the intense life in the eyes. He filled up the shrunken features. He perceived the real flesh beneath the flabby skin, the real mouth through the grimaces that deformed it. Those were the eyes and mouth of the other, and especially his keen, alert, mocking expression, so clear and youthful. "Arsène Lupin! Arsène Lupin!" he stammered. Then, in a sudden fit of rage, he seized Lupin by the throat and tried to hold him down. In spite of his 50 years, he still possessed unusual strength, whilst his adversary was apparently in a weak condition. But the struggle was a brief one. Arsène Lupin made only a slight movement, and, as suddenly as he had made the attack, Ganimard released his hold. His right arm fell inert, useless. "If you had taken lessons in jiu-jitsu at the Quai d'Orfèvre," said Leblanc, "you would know that blow is called an urishigishi. Urishigi. In Japanese. That's not Japanese, but all right. A second more, and I would have broken your arm, and that would have been just what you deserve. I am surprised that you, an old friend whom I respect and before whom I voluntarily expose my incognito, should abuse my confidence in that violent manner. It is unworthy. Ah, what's the matter?" Ganimard did not reply. That escape for which he deemed himself responsible, was it not he, Ganimard, who by his sensational evidence had led the court into serious error? That escape appeared to him like a dark cloud on his professional career. A tear rolled down his cheek to his grey moustache. "Oh, mon Dieu, Ganimard, don't take it to heart. If you had not spoken, I would have arranged for someone else to do it. I couldn't allow poor Baudru Désiré to be convicted." "Then," murmured Ganimard, "it was you that was there? Now you are here?" "It is I. Always I. Only I." "Can it be possible?" "Oh, it is not the work of a sorcerer. Simply, as the judge remarked at the trial, the apprenticeship of a dozen years that equips a man to cope successfully with all the obstacles in life." "But your face, your eyes—" "You can understand that if I worked 18 months with Dr. Altier at the St. Louis Hospital, it was not out of love for the work. I considered that he, who would one day have the honor of calling himself Arsène Lupin, ought to be exempt from the ordinary laws governing appearance and identity. Appearance? That can be modified at will. For instance, a hypodermic injection of paraffin will puff up the skin at the desired spot. Pyrogallic acid will change your skin to that of an Indian. The juice of the greater celandine will adorn you with the most beautiful eruptions and tumors. Another chemical affects the growth of your beard and hair. Another changes the tone of your voice. Add to that 2 months of dieting in cell 24, exercises repeated 1,000 times to enable me to hold my features in a certain grimace, to carry my head at a certain inclination and adapt my back and shoulders to a stooping posture. Then 5 drops of atropine in the eyes to make them haggard and wild, and the trick is done. I do not understand how you deceive the guards. The change was progressive. The evolution was so gradual that they failed to notice it. But Baudru Desiree? Baudru exists. He is a poor, harmless fellow whom I met last year, and really, he bears a certain resemblance to me. Considering my arrest as a possible event, I took charge of Baudru and studied the points wherein we differed in appearance, with a view to correct them in my own person. My friends caused him to remain at the depot overnight, and to leave there next day about the same hour as I did. A coincidence easily arranged. Of course, it was necessary to have a record of his detention at the depot in order to establish the fact that such a person was a reality. Otherwise, the police would have sought elsewhere to find out my identity. But in offering to them this excellent Baudru, it was inevitable, you understand, inevitable that they would seize upon him. And despite the insurmountable difficulties of a substitution, they would prefer to believe in a substitution than confess their ignorance. Yes, of course, said Ganimard. And then, exclaimed Arsène Lupin, I held in my hand the trump card, an anxious public watching and waiting for my escape. And that is the fatal error into which you fell, you and the others, in the course of that fascinating game pending between me and the officers of the law, wherein the stake was my liberty. And you supposed that I was playing to the gallery, that I was intoxicated with my success. I, Arsène Lupin, guilty of such weakness? Oh, no! And no longer ago than the Cahorn affair, you said when Arsène Lupin cries from the housetops that he will escape, he has some object in view. But, sapristi, you must understand that in order to escape, I must create, in advance, a public belief in that escape. A belief amounting to an article of faith, an absolute conviction. A reality as glittering as the sun. And I did create that belief that Arsène Lupin would escape, that Arsène Lupin would not be present at his trial. And when you gave your evidence and said, that man is not Arsène Lupin, everybody was prepared to believe you. And one person doubted it. And anyone uttered this simple restriction, suppose it is Arsène Lupin, from that moment I was lost. If anyone had scrutinized my face, not imbued with the idea that I was not Arsène Lupin, as you and the others did at my trial, but with the idea that I might be Arsène Lupin, then, despite all my precautions, I should have been recognized. But I had no fear. Logically, psychologically, no once could entertain the idea that I was Arsène Lupin. He grasped Ganimard's hands. Come, Ganimard, confess that on the Wednesday after our conversation in the Prison de la Santé, you expected me at your house at 4 o'clock, exactly as I said I would go. And your prison van? Said Ganimard, evading the question. A bluff. Some of my friends secured that old unused van and wished to make the attempt. But I considered it impractical without the concurrence of a number of unusual circumstances. However, I found it useful to carry out that attempted escape and give it the widest publicity. However, an audaciously planned escape, though not completed, gave to the succeeding one the character of reality, simply by anticipation. So that the cigar, hollowed by myself, as well as the knife, and the letters, written by me, and the mysterious correspondent, did not exist. Ganimard reflected a moment, then said, "When the Anthropological Service had Baudru's case under consideration, why did they not perceive that his measurements coincided with those of Arsène Lupin?" "My measurements are not in existence." "Indeed? At least, they are false. I have given considerable attention to that question. In the first place, the Bertillon system records the visible marks of identification, and you have seen that they are not infallible. And, after that, the measurements of the head, the fingers, the ears, etc. Of course, such measurements are more or less infallible." "Absolutely. No, but it costs money to get around them. Before we left America, one of the employees of the service there accepted so much money to insert false figures in my measurements. Consequently, Baudru's measurements should not agree with those of Arsène Lupin." After a short silence, Ganimard asked, "What are you going to do now?" "Now," replied Lupin, "I am going to take a rest, enjoy the best food and drink, and gradually recover my former healthy condition. It is all very well to become Baudru or some other person, on occasion, and to change your personality as well as you do your shirt, but you soon grow weary of the change. I feel exactly as I imagine the man who lost his shadow must have felt, and I shall be glad to be Arsène Lupin once more." He walked to and fro for a few minutes. Then, stopping in front of Ganimard, he said, "You have nothing more to say, I suppose?" "Yes. I should like to know if you intend to reveal the true state of facts connected with your escape. The mistake that I made—" "Oh, no one will ever know that it was Arsène Lupin who was discharged. It is to my own interest to surround myself with mystery, and therefore I shall permit my escape to retain its almost miraculous character. So, have no fear on that score, my dear friend. I shall say nothing. And now, goodbye. I am going out to dinner this evening, and have only sufficient time to dress." "I thought you wanted a rest." "Ah, there are duties to society that one cannot avoid. Tomorrow I shall rest." "Where do you dine tonight?" "With the British ambassador." That brings us to the end of Chapter 3. I won't say that it was easy to suss out, because I did call it, but it was one of a very few options there, that it was in fact Lupin all along, and it doesn't take away from the mystique of it, the class and the debonair manner in which the smoothest of escapes was done, to be just let go. Slick as it gets. All right, let's go ahead and continue on. We've got, judging by the time, we can probably get through, I'd say there's a good chance we can get through two more chapters tonight. So, let's continue and see what, now that Lupin has his freedom, what he'll do with it next. Chapter 4. The Mysterious Traveler. The evening before, I had sent my automobile to Rouen by the highway. I was to travel to Rouen by rail, on my way to visit some friends that live on the banks of the Seine. At Paris, a few minutes before the train started, 7 gentlemen entered my compartment. 5 of them were smoking. No matter that the journey was a short one, the thought of traveling with such company was not agreeable to me, especially as the car was built on the old model, without a corridor. I picked up my overcoat, my newspapers, and my timetable, and sought refuge in a neighboring compartment. You know what? Totally valid. Smokers walk in, I'm walking out. That's just how that goes. It was occupied by a lady who, at sight of me, made a gesture of annoyance that did not escape my notice. She leaned toward a gentleman who was standing on the step and was, no doubt, her husband. The gentleman scrutinized me closely, and apparently my appearance did not displease him, for he smiled as he spoke to his wife, with the air of one who reassures a frightened child. She smiled also, and gave me a friendly glance, as if she now understood that I was one of those gallant men with whom a woman can remain shut up for 2 hours in a little box, 6 feet square, and have nothing to fear. Sorry, 1 sec, just double checking. Something looks a little weird. I think our category got wiped out on Twitch. It did. That's strange. Let's fix that. There we go. That looks better. It probably won't really affect discoverability terribly much. There's not usually very many people on writing and reading, but all the same, we should at least pretend, right? Alright. Her husband said to her, "I have an appointment, my dear, and cannot wait any longer. Adieu." He kissed her affectionately and went away. His wife threw him a few kisses and waved her handkerchief. The whistle sounded and the train started. Exactly. We have to at least try to play by the rules. Speaking of, I don't know what happened yesterday. I don't know if some bots found us or what. There was no chat, there was no spam or anything, but out of nowhere, we had over 100 viewers at the same time on last night's Fellowship of the Ring reading, which is so far out of the norm that it had, and there was no interaction, there was no nothing. It had to have been like a bot farm showed up or something, but it made for a cool spike on my analytics page. Alright. Yeah, the lack of interaction really sold me on that. Alright. At that precise moment, and despite the protests of the guards, the door was opened, and a man rushed into our compartment. My companion, who was standing and arranged her luggage, uttered a cry of terror and fell upon the seat. I am not a coward, far from it, but I confess that such intrusions at the last minute are always disconcerting. They have a suspicious, unnatural aspect. Hi, Simba. However, the appearance of the new arrival greatly modified the unfavorable impression produced by his precipitant action. He was correctly and elegantly dressed, wore a tasteful cravat, correct gloves, and his face was refined and intelligent. But where the devil had I seen that face before? Because, beyond all possible doubt, I had seen it. And yet, the memory of it was so vague and indistinct that I felt it would be useless to try to recall it at that time. Then, directing my attention to the lady, I was amazed at the pallor and anxiety I saw in her face. She was looking at her neighbor. They occupied seats on the same side of the compartment, with an expression of intense alarm. And I perceived that one of her trembling hands was slowly gliding toward a little traveling bag that was lying on the seat about 20 inches from her. She finished by seizing it and nervously drawing it to her. Our eyes met, and I read in hers so much anxiety and fear that I could not refrain from speaking to her. "Are you ill, madame? Shall I open the window?" Her only reply was a gesture indicating that she was afraid of our companion. I smiled as her husband had done, shrugged my shoulders, and explained to her in pantomime that she had nothing to fear, that I was there, and besides... The gentleman appeared to be a very harmless individual. At that moment he turned towards us, scrutinized both of us from head to foot, then settled down in his corner and paid us no more attention. After a short silence, the lady, as if she had mustered all her energy to perform a desperate act, said to me in an almost inaudible voice, "Do you know who is on our train?" "Who?" He, I assure you." "Who is he?" "Arsène Lupin." She had not taken her eyes off our companion, and it was to him, rather than to me, that she uttered the syllables of that disquieting name. He drew his hat over his face. Was that to conceal his agitation, or simply to arrange himself for sleep? Then I said to her, "Yesterday, through contumacy, Arsène Lupin was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment at hard labor. Therefore it is improbable that he would be so imprudent today as to show himself in public. Moreover, the newspapers have announced his appearance in Turkey since his escape from the Salt." "But he is on this train at the present moment," the lady proclaimed, with the obvious intention of being heard by our companion. "My husband is one of the directors in the penitentiary service, and it was the station master himself who told us that a search was being made for Arsène Lupin." "They may have been mistaken." "No! He was seen in the waiting room. He bought a first-class ticket for Rouen." "He has disappeared. The guard at the waiting room floor did not see him pass, and it is supposed that he had gotten into the express that leaves 10 minutes after us." In that case, they will be sure to catch him. "Unless, at the last moment, he leaped from that train to come here into our train, which is quite probable, which is almost certain." If so, he will be arrested just the same, where the employees and guards would no doubt observe his passage from one train to the other. And when we arrive at Rouen, they will arrest him there." "Him? Never! He will have to find some means of escape." "In that case, I wish him bon voyage." "But, in the meantime, think what he may do." "What?" I don't know. He may do anything." She was greatly agitated, and truly the situation justified to some extent her nervous excitement. I was impelled to say to her, "Of course there are many strange coincidences, but you need have no fear. Admitting that Arsène Lupin is on this train, he will not commit any indiscretion. He will only be too happy to escape the peril that already threatens him." My words did not reassure her, but she remained silent for a time. I unfolded my newspapers and read the reports of Arsène Lupin's trial, but as they contained nothing that was new to me, I was not greatly interested. Moreover, I was tired and sleepy. I felt my eyelids close and my head drop. "But, monsieur, you are not going to sleep." She seized my newspaper and looked at me with indignation. "Certainly not," I said.
"That would be very imprudent."
"Of course," I assented. I struggled to keep awake. I looked through the window at the landscape and the fleeting clouds, but in a short time, all that became confused and indistinct. The image of the nervous lady and the drowsy gentleman were effaced from my memory, and I was buried in the soothing depths of a profound sleep. The tranquility of my response was soon disturbed by disquieting dreams, wherein a creature that had played the part and bore the name of Arsène Lupin held an important place. He appeared to me with his back laden with articles of value. He leaped over walls and plundered castles, but the outlines of that creature who was no longer Arsène Lupin, assumed a more definite form. He came toward me, growing larger and larger, leaped into the compartment with incredible agility, and landed squarely on my chest. With a cry of fright and pain, I awoke. The man, the traveler, our companion, with his knee on my breast, held me by the throat. My sight was very indistinct, for my eyes were suffused with blood. I could see the lady in a corner of the apartment, convulsed with fright. I tried even not to resist, because besides, I did not have the strength. My temples throbbed. I was almost strangled. 1 minute more, and I would have breathed my last. The man must have realized it, for he relaxed his grip, but did not remove his hand. Then he took a cord, in which he had prepared a slip knot, and tied my wrists together. In an instant, I was bound, gagged, and helpless. Certainly, he accomplished the trick with an ease and skill that revealed the hand of a master. He was, no doubt, a professional thief. Not a word, not a nervous movement, only coolness and audacity. And I was there, lying on the bench, bound like a mummy. I, Arsène Lupin! It was not anything but a laughing matter, and yet, despite the gravity of the situation, I keenly appreciated the humor and irony that it involved. Arsène Lupin seized and bound like a novice, robbed as if I were an unsophisticated rustic. For, you must understand, the scoundrel had deprived me of my purse and wallet. Arsène Lupin, a victim, duped, vanquished, what an adventure! The lady did not move. He did not even notice her. He contented himself with picking up her traveling bag that had fallen to the floor and taking from it the jewels, purse, and gold and silver trinkets that it contained. The lady opened her eyes, trembled with fear, drew the rings from her fingers, and handed them to the man as if she wished to spare him unnecessary trouble. He took the rings and looked at her. She swooned. Then, quite unruffled, he resumed his seat, lighted a cigarette, and proceeded to examine the treasure that he had acquired. The examination appeared to give him perfect satisfaction. But I was not so well satisfied. I do not speak of the 12,000 francs of which I had been unduly deprived. That was only a temporary loss, because I was certain that I would recover possession of that money after a very brief delay, together with the important papers contained in my wallet. Plans, specifications, addresses, lists of correspondence, and compromising letters. But for the moment, a more immediate and more serious question troubled me. How would this affair end? What would be the outcome of this adventure? As you can imagine, the disturbance created by my passage through the St. Lazare station has not escaped my notice. Going to visit my friends who knew me under the name of Gentleman-Burglar, and amongst whom my resemblance to Arsène Lupin was the subject of many innocent jests, I could not assume a disguise, and my presence had been remarked. So, beyond question, the commissary of police at Rouen, notified by telegraph and assisted by numerous agents, would be awaiting the train, would question all suspicious passengers, and proceed to search the cars. Of course, I had foreseen all that, but it had not disturbed me, as I was certain that the police of Rouen would not be any shrewder than the police of Paris, and that I could escape recognition. Would it not be sufficient for me to carelessly display my card as a deputy, thanks to which I had inspired complete confidence in the gatekeeper at St. Lazare? But the question was greatly changed. I was no longer free. It was impossible to attempt one of my usual tricks. In one of the compartments, the commissary of police would find Monsieur Arsène Lupin bound hand and foot, as docile as a lamb, packed up, all ready to be dumped into a prison van. He would simply have to accept delivery of the parcel, the same as if it were so much merchandise or a basket of fruit and vegetables. Yet, to avoid that shameful denouement, what could I do, bound and gagged as I was? And the train was rushing on toward Rouen, the next and only station. Another problem was presented, in which I was less interested, but the solution of which aroused my professional curiosity.
What were the intentions of my rascally companion? Of course, if I had been alone, he could, on our arrival at Rouen, leave the car slowly and fearlessly. But the lady? As soon as the door of the compartment should be opened, the lady, now so quiet and humble, would scream and call for help. That was the dilemma that perplexed me. Why had he not reduced her to a helpless condition similar to mine? That would have given him ample time to disappear before his double crime was discovered. Still, he was still smoking, with his eyes fixed upon the window that was now being streaked with drops of rain. Once he turned, picked up my timetable, and consulted it. The lady had to feign a continued lack of consciousness in order to deceive the enemy, but fits of coughing, provoked by the smoke, exposed her true condition. As to me, I was very uncomfortable and very tired, and I meditated. I plotted. The train was rushing on, joyously intoxicated with its own speed. Saint Etienne! At that moment, the man arose and took 2 steps towards us, which caused the lady to utter a cry of alarm and fall into a genuine swoon. What was the man about to do? He lowered the window on our side. A heavy rain was now falling, and, by a gesture, the man expressed his annoyance at his not having an umbrella or an overcoat. He glanced at the track. The lady's umbrella was there. He took it. He also took my overcoat and put it on. We were now crossing the scene. He turned up the bottoms of his trousers, then leaned over and raised the exterior latch of the door. Was he going to throw himself upon the track? At that speed, it would have been instant death. We now entered a tunnel. The man opened the door halfway and stood on the upper step. What folly! The darkness, the smoke, the noise all gave a fantastic appearance to his actions. But suddenly, the train diminished its speed. A moment later, it increased its speed, then slowed up again. Probably some repairs were being made in that part of the tunnel which obliged the trains to diminish their speed. And the man was aware of the fact. He immediately stepped down to the lower step, closed the door behind him, and leaped to the ground. He was gone. The lady immediately recovered her wits, and her first act was to lament the loss of her jewels. I gave her an imploring look. She understood, and quickly removed the gag that stifled me. She wished to untie the cords that bound me, but I prevented her. No, the police must see everything exactly as it stands. I want them to see what the rascal did to us. Suppose I pulled the alarm bell? Too late. You should have done that when he made the attack on me. But he would have killed me. Oh, monsieur, didn't I tell you that he was on this train? I recognized him from his portrait, and now he has gone off with my jewels. Don't worry, the police will catch him. That's Arsène Lupin? Never. That depends on you, madame. Listen, when we arrive at Rouen, be at the door and call. Make a noise. The police and the railway employees will come. Tell what you have seen. The assault made on me and the flight of Arsène Lupin. Give a description of him. Soft hat, umbrella, yours. Grey overcoat. Yours? Said she. What? Mine? Not at all. It was his. I didn't have any. It seems to me he didn't have one when he came in. Yes. Unless the coat was one that someone had forgotten and left in the rack. At all events, he had it when he went away. And that is the essential point. A grey overcoat, remember. I forgot. You must tell your name. First thing you do, your husband's official position will stimulate the zeal of the police. We arrived at the station. I gave her some further instructions in a rather imperious tone. Tell them my name, Gutenberg. If necessary, say that you know me. That will save time. We must expedite the preliminary investigation. The important thing is the pursuit of Arsène Lupin. Your jewels, remember. Let there be no mistake. Gutenberg, a friend of your husband. I understand. Gutenberg. She was already calling and gesticulating. As soon as the train stopped, several men entered the compartment. The critical moment had come. Panting for breath, the lady exclaimed, Arsène Lupin! He attacked us! He stole my jewels! I am Madame Renaud. My husband is a director of the penitentiary service. Here is my brother, George Ardel, director of Credit Ruinard. You must know... She embraced a young man who had just joined us, and whom the commissary saluted. Then she continued, weeping. Yes, Arsène Lupin. While Monsieur was sleeping, he seized him by the throat. Monsieur Burglar, a friend of my husband. The commissary asked, But where is Arsène Lupin? He leaped from the train when passing through the tunnel. Are you sure that it was he? I am sure. I recognized him perfectly. Besides, he was seen at the St. Lazare station. He wore a soft hat. No, a hard hat. A hard felt, like that, said the commissary, pointing to my hat. He had a soft hat, I am sure, repeated Madame Roland, and a grey overcoat. Yes, that is right, replied the commissary. The telegram says he wore a grey overcoat with a black velvet collar. Exactly, a black velvet collar, exclaimed Madame Roland triumphantly. I breathed freely. Ah, excellent friend I had in that little woman. The police agents had now released me. I bit my lips until they ran blood, stooping over with my handkerchief over my mouth, an attitude quite natural in a person who has remained for a long time in an uncomfortable position, and whose mouth shows the bloody marks of the gag. I addressed the commissary in a weak voice. Monsieur, it was Arsène Lupin. There is no doubt about that. If we make haste, he can be caught yet. I think I may be of some service to you. The railway car, in which the crime occurred, was detached from the train to serve as a mute witness at the official investigation. The train continued on its way to Havre. We were then conducted to the station master's office through a crowd of curious spectators. Then I had a sudden access of doubt and discretion. Under some pretext or other, I must gain my automobile and escape. To remain there was dangerous. Something might happen. For instance, a telegram from Paris, and I would be lost. Yes, but what about my thief? Abandoned to my own resources, in an unfamiliar country, I could not hope to catch him. But I must make the attempt, I said to myself. It may be a difficult game, but an amusing one, and the stake is well worth the trouble. When the commissary asked us to repeat the story of the robbery, I exclaimed, Monsieur, really, Arsène Lupin is getting the start of us. My automobile is waiting in the courtyard. If you will be so kind as to use it, we can try. The commissary smiled and replied, The idea is a good one. So good, indeed, that it is already being carried out. 2 of my men had set out on bicycles. They have been gone for some time. Where did they go? To the entrance of the tunnel. There they will gather evidence, secure witnesses, and follow on the track of Arsène Lupin. I could not refrain from shrugging my shoulders as I replied, Your men will not secure any evidence or any witnesses. Really? Arsène Lupin will not allow anyone to see him emerge from the tunnel. He will take the first road to Rouen, where we will arrest him. He will not go to Rouen. Then he will remain in the vicinity, where his capture will be even more certain. He will not remain in the vicinity. Oh, and where will he hide? I looked at my watch and said, At the present moment, Arsène Lupin is prowling around the station at Donatol. At 10:50, that is, in 22 minutes from now, he will take the train that goes from Rouen to Amiens. Do you think so? How do you know it? Oh, it is quite simple. While we were in the car, Arsène Lupin consulted my railway guide. Why did he do it? Was there, not far from the spot where he disappeared, another line of railway, a station upon that line, and a train stopping at that station? On consulting my railway guide, I found such to be the case. Really, monsieur, said the commissary, that is a marvellous deduction. I congratulate you on your skill. I was now convinced that I had made a mistake in displaying so much cleverness. The commissary regarded me with astonishment, and I thought a slight suspicion entered his official mind. Oh, scarcely that, for the photographs distributed broadcast by the police department were too imperfect. They presented an Arsène Lupin no different from the one he had before him, that he could not possibly recognize me by it. But all the same, he was troubled, confused, and ill at ease. Mon Dieu! Nothing stimulates the comprehension so much as the loss of a pocketbook and the desire to recover it. And it seems to me that if you will give me 2 of your men, we may be able to— Oh, I beg of you, Monsieur le Commissaire, cried Madame Renaud. Listen to Monsieur Belin. The intervention of my excellent friend was decisive. Pronounced by her, the wife of an influential official, the name of Burglar became really my own. and gave me an identity that no mere suspicion could affect. The commissary arose and said, "Believe me, Monsieur Burglar, I shall be delighted to see you succeed. I am as much interested as you are in the arrest of Arsène Lupin." He accompanied me to the automobile and introduced two of his men, Arnaud Masson and Gaston Delevé, who were assigned to assist me. My chauffeur cranked up the car, and I took my place at the wheel. A few seconds later, we left the station. I was saved. I must confess that in rolling over the boulevards that surrounded the old Norman city in my swift 35-horsepower Moreau Lepton, I experienced a deep feeling of pride, and the motor responded sympathetically to my desires. At right and left, the trees flew past us with startling rapidity, and I, free, out of danger, had simply to arrange my little personal affairs with the two honest representatives of the Rouen police who were sitting behind me. Arsène Lupin was going in search of Arsène Lupin. Modest guardians of social order, Gaston Delevé and Arnaud Masson, how valuable was your assistance? What would I have done without you? Without you, many times at the crossroads I might have taken the wrong route. Without you, Arsène Lupin would have made a mistake, and the other would have escaped. But the end was not yet. Far from it. I had yet to capture the thief and recover the stolen papers. Under no circumstances must my two acolytes be permitted to see those papers, much less to seize them. That was a point that might give me some difficulty. We arrived at Darnatol 3 minutes after the departure of the train. True, I had the consolation of learning that a man wearing a grey overcoat with a black velvet collar had taken the train at the station. He had bought a second-class ticket for Amiens. Certainly, my debut as detective was a promising one. Delevé said to me, the train is express, and the next stop is Monterolier, Bucci, in 19 minutes. If we do not reach there before Arsène Lupin, he can proceed to Amiens, or change for the train going to Cléret. And from that point, to Dieppe or Paris. How far to Monterolier? 23 kilometers. 23 kilometers in 19 minutes. We shall be there ahead of him. We were off again. Never had my faithful Moreau Repton responded to my impatience with such ardor and regularity. It participated in my anxiety. It endorsed my determination. It comprehended my animosity against that rascally Arsène Lupin, the knave, the traitor. "Turn to the right," cried Delevé, "then to the left." We fairly flew. Scarcely touching the ground, the milestones looked like little timid beasts that vanished at our approach. Suddenly, at a turn of the road, we saw a vortex of smoke. It was the Northern Express. For a kilometre it was a struggle, side by side, but an unequal struggle, in which the issue was certain. We won the race by 20 lengths. In 3 seconds we were on the platform, standing before the second-class carriages. The doors were opened, and some passengers alighted. But not my thief. We made a search through the compartments. No sign of Arsène Lupin. "Sapristi!" I cried. He must have recognized me in the automobile as we were racing, side by side, and he leaped from the train. "Ah, there he is now, crossing the track." I started in pursuit of the man, followed by my two acolytes, or rather, followed by one of them, for the other, Masson, proved himself to be a runner of exceptional speed and endurance. In a few moments he had made an appreciable gain upon the fugitive. The man noticed it, leaped over a hedge, scampered across a meadow, and entered a thick grove. When we reached this grove, Masson was waiting for us. He went no further, for fear of losing us. "Quite right, my dear friend," I said. "After such a run, our victim must be out of wind. We will catch him now." I examined the surroundings with the idea of proceeding alone in the arrest of the fugitive, in order to recover my papers, concerning which the authorities would doubtless ask many disagreeable questions. Then I returned to my companions and said, "It is all quite easy. You, Masson, take your place at the left. You, Delevé, at the right. From there you can observe the entire posterior line of the bush, and he cannot escape without you seeing him. Except by that ravine, and I shall watch it. If he does not come out voluntarily, I will enter and drive him out toward one or the other of you. You have simply to wait. I forgot. In case I need you, a pistol shot." Massol and Delevet walked away to their respective posts. As soon as they had disappeared, I entered the grove with the greatest precaution, so as to be neither seen nor heard. I encountered dense thickets, through which narrow paths had been cut, but the overhanging boughs compelled me to adopt a stooping posture. One of these paths led to a clearing, in which I found footsteps upon the wet grass. I followed them. They led me to the foot of a mound, which was surmounted by a deserted, dilapidated hovel. He must be there, I said to myself. It is a well-chosen retreat. I crept cautiously to the side of the building. A slight noise informed me that he was there, and then, through an opening, I saw him. His back was turned toward me. In 2 bounds I was upon him. He tried to fire a revolver that he had held in his hand, but he had no time. I threw him to the ground, in such a manner that his arms were beneath him, twisted and helpless, whilst I held him down with my knee on his breast. "Listen, my boy," I whispered in his ear. "I am Arsène Lupin. You are to deliver over to me, immediately and gracefully, my pocketbook and the lady's jewels. And, in return, therefore, I will save you from the police and enroll you amongst my friends. One word, yes or no?" "Yes," he murmured. "Very good. Your escape this morning was well planned. I congratulate you." I arose. He fumbled in his pocket, drew out a large knife, and tried to strike me with it. "Imbecile!" I exclaimed. With one hand, I parried the attack. With the other, I gave him a sharp blow on the carotid artery. He fell, stunned. In my pocketbook, I recovered my papers and banknotes. Out of curiosity, I took his. Upon an envelope addressed to him, I read his name, Pierre Onfray. It startled me. Pierre Onfray, the assassin of the Rue La Fontaine at Auteuil. Pierre Onfray, who had cut the throat of Madame Delbois and her 2 daughters. I leaned over him. Yes, those were the features which in the compartment had evoked in me the memory of a face I could not then recall. But time was passing. I placed in an envelope 2 banknotes, of 100 francs each, with a card bearing the words Arsène Lupin to his worthy colleagues Honor, Massol, and Gaston Delevet, as a slight token of his gratitude. I placed it in a prominent spot in the room, where they would be sure to find it. Beside it, I placed Madame Renaud's handbag. Why could I not return it to the lady who had befriended me? I must confess that I had taken from it everything that possessed any interest or value, leaving there only a shell comb, a stick of rouge d'oran for the lips, and an empty purse. But, you know, business is business. And then, really, her husband is engaged in such a dishonourable vocation. The man was becoming conscious. What was I to do? I was unable to save him or condemn him. So I took his revolver and fired a shot in the air. My 2 acolytes will come and attend to his case, I said to myself, as I hastened away by the road through the ravine. 20 minutes later, I was seated in my automobile. At 4 o'clock, I telegraphed to my friends at Rouen that an unexpected event would prevent me from making my promised visit. Between ourselves, considering what my friends must now know, my visit is postponed indefinitely. A cruel disillusion for them. At 6 o'clock, I was in Paris. The evening newspapers informed me that Pierre Onfray had been captured at last. Next day, let us not despise the advantages of judicious advertising, the Echo de France published this sensational item. Yesterday, near Bucci, after numerous exciting incidents, Arsène Lupin effected the arrest of Pierre Onfray. The assassin of the Rue La Fontaine had robbed Madame Renaud, wife of the director in the penitentiary service, in a railway carriage on the Paris-Havre line. Arsène Lupin restored to Madame Renaud the handbag that contained her jewels, and gave a generous recompense to the 2 detectives who had assisted him in making that dramatic arrest. All right, that brings us to the end of Chapter 4, which was a very fun little twist in there. A little bit of defying of expectations, wherein Arsène Lupin himself was mugged, and as revenge for his mugger, brought him to justice, with a little profit for himself. It's a little bit of sweetener for the bargain. Very fun. Very fun. All right, let's go ahead and take a few minutes now. Break. We're a little bit past the hour. Top up our drinks, stretch our legs, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Thanks. All right, we are back. So, let's go ahead and continue. I think, judging by the length of this last chapter, this next chapter, we should be able to fit it in tonight. If we run a little bit over, it will not be the end of the world. But it might actually just fit out about perfectly. We got about 40 minutes, and it's about 13 pages. These seem to go pretty quickly. So, let us resume now with Chapter 5, The Queen's Necklace. Two or three times each year, on occasions of unusual importance, such as the balls at the Austrian embassy, or the soirees of Lady Billingstone, the Countess de Dreux-Soubise wore upon her white shoulders the Queen's necklace. It was, indeed, the famous necklace, the legendary necklace that Beaumer and Bossange, court jewelers, had made for Madame du Barry, the veritable necklace that the Cardinal de Rohan-Soubise intended to give to Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, and the same that the adventurous Jeanne de Valois, Countess de la Motte, had pulled to pieces one evening in February 1785 with the aid of her husband and their accomplice Rateau de Villette. Okay, seriously. This is the Frenchest of French books that we've read. This is Frenchier than the Three Musketeers. So I hope you're happy. I hope you're happy. It was, indeed, the famous necklace. Oh, no, we already got through that. Okay. To tell the truth, the mounting alone was genuine. Rateau de Villette had kept it, whilst the Count de la Motte and his wife scattered to the four winds of heaven the beautiful stones so carefully chosen by Beaumer. Later, he sold the mounting to Gaston de Dreux-Soubise, nephew and heir of the Cardinal, who repurchased the few diamonds that remained in the possession of the English jeweller, Jeffreys, supplemented them with other stones of the same size but of much inferior quality, and thus restored the marvellous necklace to the form in which it had come from the hands of Beaumer and Bossange. For nearly a century, the house of Dreux-Soubise had prided itself upon the possession of this historic jewel. Although adverse circumstances had greatly reduced their fortune, they preferred to curtail their household expenses rather than part with this relic of royalty. More particularly, the present Count clung to it as a man clings to the home of his ancestors. As a matter of prudence, he had rented a safety deposit box at the Crédit Lyonnais, in which to keep it. He went for it himself on the afternoon of the day on which his wife wished to wear it, and he himself carried it back next morning. On this particular evening, at the reception given at the Palais de Castille, the Countess achieved a remarkable success, and King Christian, in whose honor the fete was given, commented on her grace and beauty. The 1,000 facets of the diamond sparkled and shone like flames of fire about her shapely neck and shoulders, and it is safe to say that none but she could have borne the weight of such an ornament with so much ease and grace. This was a double triumph, and the Count de Dreux was highly elated when they returned to their chamber in the old house of the Faubourg Saint-Germain. He was proud of his wife, and quite as proud, perhaps, of the necklace that had conferred added luster to his noble house for generations. His wife also regarded the necklace with an almost childish vanity, and it was not without regret that she removed it from her shoulders and handed it to her husband, who admired it as passionately as if he had never seen it before. Then, having placed it in its case of red leather, stamped with the cardinal's arms, he passed into an adjoining room, which was simply an alcove or cabinet that had been cut off from their chamber, and which could be entered only by means of a door at the foot of their bed. As he had done on previous occasions, he hid it on a high shelf amongst hat boxes and piles of linen. He closed the door and retired. Next morning, he arose about 9 o'clock, intending to go to the Crédit Lyonnais before breakfast. He dressed, drank a cup of coffee, and went to the stables to give his orders. The condition of one of the horses worried him. He caused it to be exercised in his presence. Then he returned to his wife, who had not yet left the chamber. Her maid was dressing her hair. When her husband entered, she asked, "Are you going out?" Yes, as far as the bank." "Of course, that is wise." He entered the cabinet, but after a few seconds, and without any sign of astonishment, he asked, "Did you take it, my dear?" "What? No, I have not taken anything." "You must have moved it." "Not at all. I've not even opened that door." He appeared at the door, concerted, and stammered in a scarcely intelligible voice, You haven't... It wasn't you. Then... She hastened to his assistance, and together they made a thorough search, throwing the boxes to the floor and overturning the piles of linen. Then the Count said, quite discouraged, "It is useless to look any more. I put it here, on this shelf." "You must be mistaken." No, it was on this shelf, nowhere else." They lighted a candle, as the room was quite dark, and then carried out all the linen and other articles that the room contained. And, when the room was emptied, they confessed, in despair, that the famous necklace had disappeared. Without losing time in vain lamentations, the Countess notified the commissary of police, Monsieur Valorbe, who came at once, and, after hearing their story, inquired of the Count, "Are you sure that no one passed through your chamber during the night?" "Absolutely, sir, as I am a very light sleeper. Besides, the chamber door was bolted, and I remembered unbolting it this morning when my wife rang for her maid." "And there is no other entrance to the cabinet?" "None." "No windows?" Yes, but it is closed up. I will look at it." Candles were lighted, and Monsieur Valorbe observed at once that the lower half of the window was covered by a large press, which was, however, so narrow that it did not touch the casement on either side. On what does this window open?" "A small inner court." "And you have a floor above this?" "Two, but on a level with the servants' floor. There is a close grating over the court. That is why this room is so dark." When the press was moved, they found that the window was fastened, which would not have been the case if anyone had entered that way. "Unless," said the Count, "they went out through our chamber." "In that case, you would have found the door unbolted." The commissary considered the situation for a moment, then asked the Countess, "Did any of your servants know that you wore the necklace last evening?" "Certainly. I didn't conceal the fact. But nobody knew that it was hidden in that cabinet." "No one?" "No one. Unless—" "Be quite sure, madame, as it is a very important point." She turned to her husband and said, I was thinking of Henriette." "Henriette? She didn't know where we kept it." "Are you sure?" "Who is this woman, Henriette?" asked Monsieur Valorbe. "A schoolmate who was disowned by her family for marrying beneath her. After her husband's death, I furnished an apartment in this house for her and her son. She is clever with her needle, and has done some work for me." "What floor is she on?" "Same as ours, at the end of the corridor. And I think the window of her kitchen—" "Opens on this little court, does it not?" "Yes, just opposite ours." Monsieur Valorbe then asked to see Henriette. They went to her apartment. She was sewing, whilst her son Raoul, about 6 years old, was sitting beside her, reading. The commissary was surprised to see the wretched apartment that had been provided for the woman. It consisted of one room without a fireplace, and a very small room that served as a kitchen. The commissary proceeded to question her. She appeared to be overwhelmed on learning of the theft. Last evening she had herself dressed the Countess and placed the necklace upon her shoulders. "Good God!" she exclaimed. "It can't be possible!" "And you have no idea? Not the least suspicion? Is it not possible that the thief may have passed through your room?" She laughed heartily, never supposing that she could be an object of suspicion. "But I have not left my room. I never go out. And perhaps you have not seen—" She opened the kitchen window and said, "See, it is at least 3 meters to the ledge of the opposite window." "Who told you that we supposed the theft might have been committed in that way?" "But the necklace was in the cabinet, wasn't it?" "How do you know that?" "Why, I have always known that it was kept there at night. It has been mentioned in my presence. Her face, though still young, bore unmistakable traces of sorrow and resignation, and it now assumed an expression of anxiety, as if some danger threatened her. She drew her son toward her. The child took her hand and kissed it affectionately. When they were alone again, the Count said to the commissary, "I do not suppose you suspect Henriette. I can answer for it. She is honesty itself." "I quite agree with you," replied Monsieur Valode. "At most, I thought there might have been an unconscious complicity, but I confess that even that theory must be abandoned, as it does not help solve the problem now before us." The commissary of police abandoned the investigation, which was now taken up and completed by the examining judge. He questioned the servants, examined the condition of the bolt, experimented with the opening and closing of the cabinet window, and explored the little court from top to bottom. All was in vain. The bolt was intact. The window could not be opened or closed from the outside. The inquiries especially concerned Henriette, for, in spite of everything, they always turned in her direction. They made a thorough investigation of her past life, and ascertained that during the last 3 years she had left the house only 4 times, and her business on those occasions was satisfactorily explained. As a matter of fact, she acted as chambermaid and seamstress to the Countess, who treated her with great strictness and even severity. Hold on, she left the house 4 times in 3 years? Woman, go touch grass, I'm sorry. At the end of a week, the examining judge had secured no more definite information than the commissary of police. The judge said, "Admitting that we know the guilty party, which we do not, we are confronted by the fact that we do not know how the theft was committed. We are brought face to face with 2 obstacles, a door and a window, both closed and fastened. It is thus a double mystery. How could anyone enter? And moreover, how could anyone escape, leaving behind him a bolted door and a fastened window?" At the end of 4 months, the secret opinion of the judge was that the Count and Countess, being hard-pressed for money, which was their normal condition, had sold the Queen's necklace. He closed the investigation. The loss of the famous jewel was a severe blow to the Dreux-Soubise. Their credit being no longer propped up by the reserve fund that such a treasure constituted, they found themselves confronted by more exacting creditors and moneylenders. They were obliged to cut down to the quick, to sell or mortgage every article they that possessed any commercial value. In brief, it would have been their ruin, if 2 large legacies from some distant relatives had not saved them. Their pride also suffered a downfall, as if they had lost a quartering from their escutcheon. And, strange to relate, it was upon their former schoolmate, Henriette, that the Countess vented her spleen. Toward her, the Countess displayed the most spiteful feelings, and even openly accused her. First, Henriette was relegated to the servants' quarters, and, next day, discharged. For some time, the Count and the Countess passed an uneventful life. They travelled a great deal. Only one incident of record occurred during that period. Some months after the departure of Henriette, the Countess was surprised when she received and read the following letter, signed by Henriette. "Madame, I do not know how to thank you, for it was you, was it not, who sent me that? It could not have been anyone else. No one but you knows where I live. If I am wrong, excuse me, and accept my sincere thanks for your past favours." What did the letter mean? The present or past favours of the Countess consisted principally of injustice and neglect. Why, then, this letter of thanks? When asked for an explanation, Henriette replied that she had received a letter through the mails, enclosing 2 banknotes of 1,000 francs each. The envelope, which she enclosed with her reply, bore the Paris postmark and was addressed in a handwriting that was obviously disguised. Now, whence came those 2,000 francs? Who had sent them? And why had they sent them? Henriette received a similar letter and a like sum of money 12 months later, and a 3rd time, and a 4th, and each year for a period of 6 years, with this difference, that in the 5th and 6th years the sum was doubled. There was another difference. the post office authorities having seized one of the letters under the pretext that it was not registered. The last 2 letters were duly sent according to the postal regulations, dated from Saint Germain, the other from Suresnes. The writer signed the first one, Enquity, and the other Peshar. The addresses that he gave were false. At the end of 6 years, Henriette died, and the mystery remained unsolved. I saw we dropped a few frames, just making sure that we're staying stable. YouTube is not happy. But when is YouTube happy? It definitely seems that the evening does not agree with us anymore. We're having, just some good old-fashioned YouTube fun. But I don't see that we're dropping a bunch of frames. We just have some fun buffering again. But I think we're live. Nope, dropping off again. Let me see what my latency looks like. Good old rolling ping to the rescue one more time. Yeah, not awful. Okay. Let's see. Alright, we're back to live. YouTube's not complaining. Twitch never complained, but very rarely does Twitch actually complain. It just degrades, such as it is. Alright. So, we've got about half of this chapter left, so let's continue. Hopefully without too much more interruption. All these events are known to the public. The case was one of those which excite public interest, and it was a strange coincidence that this necklace, which had caused such a great commotion in France at the close of the 18th century, should create a similar commotion a century later. But what I am about to relate is known only to the parties directly interested, and a few others from whom the Count exacted a promise of secrecy, as it is probable that some day or other that promise will be broken. I have no hesitation in rending the veil, and thus disclosing the key to the mystery. Yeah, like, if I drop, like, if I'm sitting here watching OBS drop frames and the buffering is obvious, I'm not too upset. It happens. But if OBS is happy, and Twitch is happy, and YouTube just decides that it doesn't want to keep up, that's when it gets frustrating. The explanation of the letter published in the morning papers 2 days ago, an extraordinary letter which increased, if possible, the mists and shadows that envelop this inscrutable drama. 5 days ago, a number of guests were dining with the Count de Dreux-Soubise. There were several ladies present, including his 2 nieces and his cousin, and the following gentlemen: the president of Essaville, the deputy Beauchamp, the Chevalier Floriani, whom the Count had known in Sicily, and General Marquis de Rouzières, an old club friend. After the repast, coffee was served by the ladies, who gave the gentlemen permission to smoke their cigarettes, provided they would not desert the salon. The conversation was general, and finally one of the guests chanced to speak of celebrated crimes, and that gave the Marquis de Rouzières, who delighted to tease the Count, an opportunity to mention the affair of the Queen's necklace, a subject that the Count detested. Each one expressed his own opinion of the affair, and, of course, their various theories were not only contradictory, but impossible. "And you, monsieur?" said the Countess. "And you, monsieur?" said the Countess to Chevalier Floriani. "What is your opinion?" "Oh, I have no opinion, madame." All the guests protested, for the Chevalier had just related in an entertaining manner various adventures in which he had participated with his father, a magistrate at Palermo, and which established his judgment and taste in such matters. "I confess," said he, "I have sometimes succeeded in unraveling mysteries that the cleverest detectives have renounced. Yet I do not claim to be Sherlock Holmes. Moreover, I know very little about the affair of the Queen's necklace." Everybody now turned to the Count, who was thus obliged, quite unwillingly, to narrate all the circumstances connected with the theft. The Chevalier listened, reflected, asked a few questions, and said, "It is very strange. At first sight, the problem appears to be a very simple one." The Count shrugged his shoulders. The others drew close to the Chevalier, who continued in a dogmatic tone, as Okay, well, I faked a cough to clear the throat, and then I actually had a cough. Fantastic. "As a general rule, in order to find the author of a crime or a theft, it is necessary to determine how that crime or theft was committed. Or, at least, how it could have been committed. In the present case, nothing is more simple, because we are face to face, not with several theories, but with one positive fact. That is to say, the thief could only enter by the chamber door or the window of the cabinet. Now, a person cannot open a bolted door from the outside. Therefore, he must have entered through the window." "But it was closed and fastened, and we found it fastened afterward," declared the Count. "In order to do that," continued Floriani, without heeding the interruption, "he was simply to construct a bridge, a plank or a ladder between the balcony of the kitchen and the ledge of the window. And as the jewel case—" "But I repeat that the window was fastened," exclaimed the Count impatiently. This time Floriani was obliged to reply. He did so with the greatest tranquillity, as if the objection was the most insignificant affair in the world. "I will admit that it was. But is there not a transom in the upper part of the window?" "How do you know that? In the first place, that was customary in houses of that date, and in the second place, without such a transom, the theft cannot be explained." "Yes, there is one, but it was closed, the same as the window. Consequently, we did not pay attention to it." "That was the mistake. For if you had examined it, you would have found that it had been opened." "But how?" "I presume that, like all others, it opens by means of a wire with a ring on the lower end." "Yes, but I do not see—" "Now, through a hole in the window, a person could, by the aid of some instrument, let us say a poker with a hook on the end, grip the ring, pull down, and open the transom." The Count laughed and said, "Excellent, excellent! Your scheme is very cleverly constructed, but you overlook one thing, monsieur. There is no hole in the window. There was a hole." "Nonsense! We would have seen it." "In order to see it, you must look for it, and no one has looked. The hole is there. It must be there, at the side of the window, in the putty, in a vertical direction, of course." The Count arose. He was greatly excited. He paced up and down the room 2 or 3 times in a nervous manner. Then, approaching Floriani, said, "Nobody has been in that room since. Nothing has been changed." "Very well, monsieur. You can easily satisfy yourself that my explanation is correct." "It does not agree with the facts established by their examining judge. You've seen nothing, and yet you contradict all that we have seen and all that we know." Floriani paid no attention to the Count's petulance. He simply smiled and said, "Mon Dieu, monsieur, I submit my theory. That is all. If I am mistaken, you can easily prove it." "I will do so at once." "I confess that your assurance—" The Count muttered a few more words, then suddenly rushed to the door and passed out. Not a word was uttered in his absence, and this profound silence gave the situation an air of almost tragic importance. Finally, the Count returned. He was pale and nervous. He said to his friends in a trembling voice, I beg your pardon. The revelations of the Chevalier were so unexpected I should never have thought." His wife questioned him eagerly. "Speak! What is it?" He stammered. "The hole is there, at the very spot, at the side of the window." He seized the Chevalier's arm and said to him in an imperious tone, "Now, monsieur, proceed. I admit that you are right so far, but now, that is not all. Go on, tell us the rest of it." Floriani disengaged his arm gently. After a moment continued. "Well, in my opinion, this is what happened. The thief, knowing that the Countess was going to wear the necklace that evening, had prepared his gangway or bridge during your absence. He watched you through the window and saw you hide the necklace. Afterward, he cut the glass and pulled the ring." "Ah, but the distance was so great that it would be impossible for him to reach the window fastening through the transom." "Well then, if he could not open the window by reaching through the transom, he must have crawled through the transom." "Impossible! It is too small! No man could crawl through it." "Then it was not a man," declared Floriani. "What? If the transom is too small to admit a man, it must have been a child." "A child? Did you not say that your friend Henriette had a son?" "Yes, a son named Raoul." "Then, in all possibility, it was Raoul who committed the theft." "What proof have you of that?" "What proof? But, for instance—" He stopped and reflected for a moment, then continued. "For instance, that gangway or bridge. It is improbable that the child could have brought it in from outside the house and carried it away again without being observed. He must have used something close at hand, in the little room used by Henriette as a kitchen. Were there not some shelves against the wall, on which she placed her pans and dishes?" 2 shelves, to the best of my memory." "Are you sure that those shelves are really fastened to the wooden brackets that support them? For, if they are not, we could be justified in presuming that the child removed them, fastened them together, and thus formed his bridge. Perhaps also, since there was a stove, we might find the bent poker that he used to open the transom." Without saying a word, the Count left the room, and this time those present did not feel the nervous anxiety they had experienced the first time. They were confident that Floriani was right, and no one was surprised when the Count returned and declared, "It was the child! Everything proves it." "You have the shelves and the poker?" "Yes, the shelves have been unnailed, and the poker is there yet." But the Countess exclaimed, "You had better say it was his mother. Henriette is the guilty party. She must have compelled her son—" "No," declared the Chevalier, "the mother had nothing to do with it." "Nonsense! They occupied the same room. The child could not have done it without the mother's knowledge." "True, they lived in the same room, but all this happened in the adjoining room, during the night, while the mother was asleep." "And the necklace?" said the Count. "It would have been found amongst the child's things." Pardon me?" "He had been out that morning, on which you found him reading. He had just come from school, and perhaps the commissary of police, instead of wasting his time on the innocent mother, would have been better employed in searching the child's desk amongst his school books." "But how do you explain those 2,000 francs that Henriette received each year? Are they not evidence of her complicity? If she had been an accomplice, would she have thanked you for that money? And then, was she not closely watched? But the child, being free, could easily go to a neighboring city, negotiate with some dealer, and sell him 1 diamond or 2 diamonds, as he might wish, upon condition that the money should be sent from Paris, and that proceeding could be repeated from year to year." An indescribable anxiety oppressed the Dreux and their guest. There was something in the tone and attitude of Floriani, something more than the Chevalier's assurance, which, from the beginning, had so annoyed the Count. There was a touch of irony that seemed rather hostile than sympathetic, but the Count affected to laugh as he said, "All that is very ingenious and interesting, and I congratulate you upon your vivid imagination." "No, not at all," replied Floriani, with the utmost gravity. "I imagine nothing. I simply describe the events as they must have occurred." "But what do you know about them?" "What you yourself have told me. I picture to myself the life of the mother and child down there in the country, the illness of the mother, the schemes of and inventions of the child to sell the precious stones in order to save his mother's life, or, at least, soothe her dying moments. Her illness overcomes her. She dies. Years roll on. The child becomes a man, and then And now I will give my imagination a free rein. Let us suppose that the man feels a desire to return to the home of his childhood. That he does so, and that he meets there certain people who suspect and accuse his mother. Do you realize the sorrow and anguish of such an interview in the very house wherein the original drama was played? His words seemed to echo for a few seconds in the ensuing silence, and one could read upon the faces of the Count and Countess the drew a bewildered effort to comprehend his meaning, and, at the same time, the fear and anguish of such a comprehension. The Count spoke at last and said, "Who are you, monsieur?" "I, the Chevalier Floriani, whom you met at Palermo, and whom you have been gracious enough to invite to your house on several occasions." "Then what does this story mean?" "Oh, nothing at all. It is simply a pastime. So far as I am concerned, I endeavour to depict the pleasure that Henriette's son, if he still lives, would have in telling you that he was the guilty party, and that he did it because his mother was unhappy, as she was on the point of losing the place of a servant by which she lived, and because the child suffered at sight of his mother's sorrow." He spoke with suppressed emotion, rose partially, and inclined toward the Countess. There could be no doubt that the Chevalier Floriani was Henriette's son. His attitude and words proclaimed it. Besides, was it not his obvious intention and desire to be recognized as such? The Count hesitated. What action would he take against the audacious guest? Ring? Provoke a scandal? Unmask the man who had once robbed him? But that was a long time ago. And who would believe that absurd story about the guilty child? No, better far to accept the situation, and pretend not to comprehend the true meaning of it. So the Count, turning to Floriani, exclaimed, "Your story is very curious, very entertaining. I enjoyed it much. But what do you think has become of this young man, his mortal son? I hope he has not abandoned the career on which he made such a brilliant debut." "Oh, certainly not." "After such a debut? To steal the Queen's necklace at 6 years of age, the celebrated necklace that was coveted by Marie Antoinette." "And to steal it," remarked Floriani, falling in with the Count's mood, "without costing him the slightest trouble, without anyone thinking to examine the condition of the window, or to observe that the window-sill was too clean, that window-sill which he had wiped in order to efface the marks he had made in the thick dust. We must admit that it was sufficient to turn the head of a boy at that age. It was all so easy. He had simply to desire the thing and reach out his hand to get it." "And he reached out his hand?" Both hands," replied the Chevalier, laughing. His companions received a shock. What mystery surrounded the life of the so-called Floriani? How wonderful must have been the life of that adventurer, a thief at 6 years of age, and who, today, in search of excitement, or, at most, to gratify a feeling of resentment, had come to brave his victim in her own house. Audaciously, foolishly, and yet with all the grace and delicacy of a courteous guest. He arose and approached the Countess to bid her adieu. She recoiled unconsciously. He smiled. "Oh, madame, you are afraid of me. Did I pursue my role of parlour magician a step too far?" She controlled herself, and replied with her accustomed ease, "Not at all, monsieur. The legend of that dutiful son interested me very much, and I am pleased to know that my necklace had such a brilliant destiny. But do you not think that the son of that woman, that Henriette, was the victim of hereditary influence in the choice of his vocation?" He shuddered, feeling the point, and replied, "I am sure of it. And, moreover, his natural tendency to crime must have been very strong, or he would have been discouraged." "Why so?" "Because, as you know, the majority of the diamonds were false. The only genuine stones were the few purchased from the English jeweller, the others having been sold, one by one, to meet the cruel necessities of life." It was still the Queen's necklace, monsieur," replied the Countess haughtily, "and that is something that he, Henriette's son, could not appreciate." "He was able to appreciate, madame, that, whether true or false, the necklace was nothing more than an object of parade, an emblem of senseless pride. The Count made a threatening gesture, but his wife stopped him. Monsieur, she said, if the man to whom you allude has the slightest sense of honor. She stopped, intimidated by Floriani's cool demeanor. If that man has the slightest sense of honor, he repeated. She felt that she would not gain anything by speaking to him in that manner, and, in spite of her anger and indignation, trembling as she was from her humiliated pride, she said to him almost politely, Monsieur, the legend says that Rotrou de Velay, when in possession of the Queen's necklace, did not disfigure the mounting. He understood that the diamonds were simply the ornament, the accessory, and that the mounting was the essential work, the creation of the artist. And he respected it accordingly. Do you think that this man had the same feeling? I have no doubt that the mounting still exists. The child respected it. Well, monsieur, if you should happen to meet him, will you tell him that he unjustly keeps possession of a relic that is the property and pride of a certain family, and that, although the stones have been removed, the Queen's necklace still belongs to the house of Dreux-Soubise? It belongs to us as much as our name or our honor. The Chevalier replied simply, I shall tell him, madame. He bowed to her, saluted the Count and the other guests, and departed. 4 days later, the Countess de Dreux found upon the table in her chamber a red leather case bearing the Cardinal's arms. She opened it and found the necklace, the Queen's necklace. But as all things must, in the life of a man who strives for unity and logic, converge toward the same goal, and as a little advertising never does any harm, on the following day, the Echo de France published these sensational lines. The Queen's necklace, the famous historical jewelry stolen from the Dreux-Soubise, has been recovered by Arsène Lupin, who hastened to restore it to its rightful owner. We cannot too highly commend such a delicate and chivalrous act. Well, that brings us to the end of Chapter 5, and just in the nick of time. Well, I'll be damned. So, that was a fun one. So we saw, let's get out of our reading nook here. We saw, yeah, even with the buffering, we finished out just right. So tonight, we saw a few different sides of Lupin. We saw the master of disguise as he made his escape from prison by fooling even the detective who arrested him. The bravado, the brilliant disguise, the setting of the stage, to convince everyone that it was not him after all, despite it very obviously being him that was in the court that day, at the trial. They just let him go. And then we next saw he played a part in the arrest of an assassin, only because that said assassin had decided to mug Lupin himself on the train. But, you know, a little bit of solving of a train robbery and capture of the perpetrator is, you know, all to build the legend of Arsène Lupin. And, of course, he made sure that everyone knew that it was him that did it. Because, I mean, leaving a little bit of something for the newspaper, you gotta keep the tabloids running, right? And then we get a little bit of backstory that almost certainly we saw the birthing moment of Arsène Lupin as he stole the necklace himself as a child and used it to ease his mother's passing, presumably. And then later insinuated himself into the household of his mother's antagonists and gave them a little bit more rubbing of the nose in it. Very, very class. And then on top of it, to have personally returned the original article, minus the jewels. And again, giving the tabloids something to print. Some sensational news about the legendary Arsène Lupin. It's a good move. That's all class. All class. So, I'm interested to see where we have to go next, because we've not really seen a whole lot of actual criminality out of Lupin. Yes, he escaped prison, but they let him out. Yes, he robbed his mugger. Fair game. As a child, he robbed this, but that was all behind the scenes. All we saw this time was him enjoying the afterglow. And even in the first episode, or the first chapter, it was just a little bit of fun on a cruise ship. And then later, a little bit of blackmail for some paintings and some art. So, really, for the legendary master thief, there's not a whole lot of actual thieving going on. It's all very much subtle. Yeah, exactly. We see people explaining things, and kind of in a yes, I'm smarter than everyone around me sort of thing. And it's all in the details. This last one was very much, it had a very, very strong vibes of Sherlock Holmes, where he's like, yes, it must be this way, it must be this way. You just need to pay attention to the details. The details are everything. Yeah. So, he's a dark reflection of Sherlock Holmes so far. And not terribly dark. Kind of a darker gray. And I guess Holmes himself is not exactly all light. He's generally on the right side of the law, but Holmes's morality is a little bit more loose in some of his stories. So, he's a darker reflection of Holmes here. And that is, it works. It works. It's kind of for the same reasons that we like Sherlock Holmes, we like this. And yeah, it's a profession. It's his calling. He's not a thug. Perish the thought. No. He is a gentleman-burglar. Alright, guys. Let's go ahead and wrap up here for the night. It is a little after 10. We got through our allotted chapters. And this one is a lot of fun so far. Let's see. There are 4 of us here. It's kind of late on a Sunday, but we haven't raided in a little bit, so let's see if anybody's around that is reading. And just see what there is to see. This is... Let's see, someone is reading. It doesn't say what she's reading, but let's try. We're only... we might get blocked because there's only 4 of us, but we'll try nonetheless. Oh, looks like we're ready. All right, we're going to raid into Honey Toasty. We haven't raided in a little bit, so this will be nice. So, say hello, and we will give her our best. Until next time, we'll be back on Tuesday for our next reading. Have a wonderful night, and thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye!